PodSaaS, where we're putting the SaaS back in sassy. Sponsored by LeadrPro, where you can book demos with target customers on demand and fill your sales pipeline instantly.
Thanks for joining PodSaaS. Today we have Luca from Jurny. Thank you for joining us, Luca. Tell us a little bit about what Jurny is, just like the quick elevator pitch, and who did you build this software solution for? And is it it's just software? Is it hardware and some kind of software component to it?
I mean, it's mainly software, and then we utilize hardware as well. It's kind of like a one of the pieces that is necessary in order for the system to work as a whole. But in a quick summary, we're trying to automate as many processes and pieces of hospitality in general, especially for hotel businesses and Airbnb businesses. The idea is that automations can really make the life easier and better for both from a guest standpoint and a host or hotel owner standpoint.
Got it. So it's like a one-stop turnkey solution, whereas like current short-term rental owners where they have maybe like 10 plus properties, for example, like they might be using a service for cleaning, a service for allowing guests to check in, check out, another service for managing the finances, another, right? So it's like the idea is that there's all these kind of like fragmented solutions, and you guys are the turnkey solution for in this instance.
Yeah, exactly. And I think one of the problems in our industry, and I think it's actually happening across multiple different industries, is exactly like you said, being fragmented. There's a lot of solution for a lot of things. I mean, I think everybody can relate to it when it comes down to messaging. If you work in a company, right, you have messaging, you have Slack, you have emails, you have Google Calendar, you have Asana's, like, and the list goes on and on and on and on, and they kind of do similar things, and oftentimes they don't work very well together. And when it comes down to hospitality, if anything, it's even more tools, and having them working well together, it's super, super, super important, because in the end of the day, the more separate pieces you have, it means the more resources you need as a business owner. And then from a guest standpoint, it's just like less of a good of experience, if that makes sense. Not knowing really how to check in, how often, like, people, you book an Airbnb and you really don't know what to start. And then there's going to be a lockbox and like hidden maybe in a bush or something. You got to find a code and just take the key out and then check in. The whole experience is really not consistent. And you may be booking a platform and then you have to talk to the owner on WhatsApp. Like, so there's like that inconsistency from both worlds.
Yeah, I mean, I want to dive more into kind of like how you guys started this company. But before we do that, we do this thing called rapid fire questions, where we have it's about like 10 different questions, but really about more of your personal experience and journey. And, I think like on a wider scale, we try to speak to a lot of people who are, wanting to be entrepreneurs, for example, and don't necessarily, know how to get there from point A to point B. And so, yeah, I'm going to have a few questions here. If any of them are uncomfortable, feel free to pass, but they're pretty straightforward. Jump right in. And if you have any questions that you want to like fire back at me afterwards, feel free to do so too. This is more of like us just kind of getting to know each other. So, you ready to get started?
Let's do it.
Cool. Do you have a favorite entrepreneur?
Favorite entrepreneur? It's a tough question, because I have favorite aspects of entrepreneurs, but I when I look at a person I look at a person as a whole. But in terms of like achievements, personal achievements, I have a great deal of respect for Elon Musk as of right now. I think Steve Jobs in the past, and then I mean, although maybe not more of an inventor, but Thomas Edison in the past as well. But yes, like I think those are kind of the top.
Those are big innovators for sure.
Yes.
Very cool. How about favorite startup story?
I have a great deal of fascination for the WeWork story. I think is very, very interesting. I followed that story from the very beginning. I think there is I like to see the greatness in everything, and I think there's some greatness in it, and there's like some mistakes that have been made. But I think looking at that story, you have to appreciate like the craft and art of fundraising from for an office space. I think that's definitely. I think there's something to learn for everybody from that story. Aside maybe from some of the details, but yes.
Best piece of advice you were ever given?
Be proud of what you built, and oftentimes I think like as like people in general, we kind of are afraid of the truth of things. I don't know why there's like this fear. And just not long time ago, someone said like, but your product is this and it's fixing a major problem. Why almost in your marketing material and everything, why you're not more straightforward with it to it? Like, and I was like, wow, I never thought that I wasn't, and I guess I wasn't, And then another one, actually, I have another advice, which is like, it's never too early to start, and it's never too late.
Well, how about a worst job that you've ever had?
I think the worst job I've ever had was going to school. I put that. I've been an entrepreneur my whole life. There's been part of my own business even today that I disliked. We were in a pandemic. It was a very difficult moment, and I had to have serious conversation with a lot of people over and over for almost like 6 to 8 months straight. And then at the same time, we were fundraising. That was tough. That was hard. I don't know if I did anything harder than that. So that was pretty hard.
Yeah, let's dive into that. I mean, like what was the challenges in there? Because obviously, yeah, you're dealing with a hospitality company during a pandemic. Like even though if you had obviously like a ton of social proof in a non-pandemic environment, like there is that question mark, right? Like of what's going to happen. So yeah, I'm curious how you navigated through that.
We had two challenges, and this is what's crazy, that a great team, a great product doesn't mean it's going to necessarily succeed, because it depends on your environment and timing on things as well. Because we do happen to think that we have an amazing product, and in personal setting, in perfect settings, we make other businesses very successful because our automations allow them to reduce a lot of their costs. So for a lot of businesses, saw us as an advantage during the pandemic, but it was so bad that travel was so not going that even if we were improving their situation, there was only so much that you could have improved. And so we had to have tough conversation throughout the pandemic with those customers. And at the same time, we were timing things to be able to fundraise. And even if we were growing client-wise, our revenue, because we work on our rev share, we're not growing as much as the client base because we're on a rev share, and travel was, we did, I think was it 2019, like February, March, right? When they hit pretty hard. I think it was 95% cancellation rates, like 95% of all bookings across the board canceled. That means that somebody who's, if a hotel was supposed to do, let's say, $100,000 in booking that month, did $5,000 instead. There's nothing you can do about it. Like it was, and that's a tough situation. You're in a startup, you're in a fragile environment, you need money, you're not making money from the revenue, you're not easily finding investors. That's a tough situation to be, but that's kind of like what you have to do when you want to be an entrepreneur.
Yeah, for sure. How about like have you had like a fuck this moment, kind of like, almost like self-questioning, self-doubt of like, am I going down the right path? Have you had any of those moments with Jurny, or not related to Jurny?
Yeah, I think everybody has those moments to know, like, where they're questioning if what they're doing is the right thing, and is the right path. But I think this is going back to a really good advice. This was actually from my dad, where he always told me, like, if things are meant to be, they're meant to be. And sometimes there's things that are outside of our control, and us trying to control them is just going to stress us out for no reason. There's nothing, if during the pandemic my business would have failed, all I can do is do the best. Once I've done that, I can go to sleep happy. Of course, it's hard, I'm not gonna lie. But I need to know that once I know I've done 100% or 110% of what I could have done, then I'm okay with myself. And so even the doubts and those things just come second, because I cannot let life, and if you want to call it the universe or God, or call it however you want, decide what the future is going to be. I just have to do the best with what I'm given, and then the rest is not up to me.
And the last question I have is, what do you want your legacy to be?
Really, like what I'm hoping for in the future of the company is to grow really this business into something very large, but not from money only, but also from a culture standpoint. We have a very different, I wouldn't say necessarily different, but a very strong culture of embracing people from all over the world. We're really like, we have employees from everywhere, and really kind of trying to give equal opportunities to everyone.
How many employees do you have now with Jurny?
We're 35 people now total.
And then how much have you guys raised now to date?
A little bit more than $30 million total.
How has growth been, and how long ago did you start the company? And I think more importantly, how did you end up into this space?
I ended up in this space almost 10 years ago now, 9 years ago. And it kind of happened randomly.
Okay.
So I think I have to go back to how I ended up in US, because I'm originally from Italy. I moved here when I was 20 years old. I turned 21 a little bit right after. I came here to study. I did a certificate program at UCLA in marketing. And I figured out that living in LA was pretty expensive. So I had to figure something out. And and I liked at the time to go out. I haven't been in a club in 9 years now, but at the time I wanted to go out. So I figured out that the best use of my time was to become a nightlife promoter, and I did. And in a very short period of time, it was me and another Italian guy, also named Luca. And in a short period of time, we became pretty successful at our job. But I moved to US with the dream of starting a tech company. That was my dream. I grew up looking at companies like Google and YouTube, and I was like, wow. And then Facebook, and I was like, this is so cool. This is like some young kids just figuring things out and just building this billion-dollar businesses. If they did it, why can't I do it? So let me move to US. Maybe I figure out. And then, I came here to study it and started a nightlife promotion. And then a client of ours at one point asked us to rent a home, a villa. And I went online, I couldn't find anything. It was very, very beginning of Airbnb and VRBO, Home Away, and those websites, right? And then I remember that through a connection, I met this guy who was a broker, and I realized that his full-time job here in LA was being a broker and brokeraging short-term rentals, short-term stays, whether it's events for short-term stays or productions for luxury villas here in LA. So I said, no one is targeting this space. I saw that as a great opportunity. So I went home literally the same night, and I built a landing page called houserentalllosangeles.com. It might still exist, by the way. It's not active, obviously, but we launched that, and I started Google AdWords for luxury homes, luxury villas for rent and stuff like that. And then the same year, it was just me and an assistant, and we did $1.2 million in revenue. And I was literally just brokering deal. Like we didn't have any property listed. People would contact us, tell us the budgets and everything, and we'll find a home. We would literally rent that home and then just re-rent it to someone else on a single deal. So we were making really good money. It only lasted a year, because a little bit more than a year, because space got saturated and everything. So that's how I got into the space. From there, I evolved the business because I saw like getting saturated, and like some of the larger players, some venture-backed companies start doing exactly that, but in large scales. And so I started managing homes from there because I had existing relationships. But I always want a tech company that was not scalable. And one of the problems I started realizing, I said, number one, Airbnb opened up a whole new industry. Now there's going to be people that the barrier to entry to start an Airbnb hotel company is almost nothing, because you can go to an apartment complex, lease one apartment, right, and sublease it on Airbnb for more money, and just keep repeating that and just scale that into a company without even raising money, right, or very little capital. So I understood that was going to become an industry, and we started looking to automating processes doing that, because we realized, listen, hospitality is a very complex business, and it's going to need a great deals of automations, and especially these people where they don't have a lot of capital, like a large hotel, like a Marriott. They don't want to employ so many people, so they are going to have to rely on automations. So that's kind of how Jurny came to play, and we realized that we were not fixing just the problems for short-term rentals. We were fixing it for the whole industry. Hotels, boutique hotels and independent hotels needed to reduce their overheads because they're running on like 10, 15% profit margin or 20% profit margin, which is very, very thin. And then like the smallest event can make them go and lose a lot of money very quick.
And especially like in this like tight labor market, it's going to be hard to also hire and retain employees too.
Absolutely.
For cost-effective rates. So that makes sense. Yeah, I mean, so how do you go from, okay, so nightlife promoter, you getting this like single, kind of like a one-off opportunity from a client to go and explore the space. You find an opportunity in this, and then you start going in and building a business off of it. You make that, basically what I understand is like you built a business similar to kind of like an Airbnb, Vrbo situation, and just got out muscled by their VC capital. And then, but you stayed in the space, started managing properties through these relationships that you already had, and then started doing some automations there. So like, I guess from that point, right, where you started managing properties to then formally incorporating Jurny, how long was that process from that?
A couple of years. Yeah, because at this point we started Jurny like 5 years ago, but it's just like the project that the size of the project, it was, to say big is an understatement, because there's so much happening, so many moving parts, and I don't want to like, make it, compare to like not, self-driving cars. I know there's like a million more components and all of that, but see, like these projects are not projects that they just happen the day after. There's a lot of moving parts, and then you have to do it with like very limited resources in the beginning. I still now, even, I know it's, maybe sounds like a lot of money, $30 million, but it's when you have to hire 35 people and to run things, and even if you're making revenue, it's still not enough. Like if you consider even the price of an engineer, like that's the other thing, as an entrepreneur, you have to be very smart in what you're doing, where you're like, make sure that, you maximize what you can do with the capital you raise.
And I don't think a lot of people necessarily think about that, right? Which is like, yeah, it's one thing to raise money, but then it's also, you got to execute and you need to get things done. How do you do it in the most effective way, and stretch that dollar to the maximum potential possible? Because you never know, right? It's like, yeah, there could be a pandemic that comes up, and then, it's like, how do you, now what you imagined your runway to be, by also booking revenue at the same time, it's going to be condensed into 50-80% of that time you're going to get cut, right? So it's like, how do you extend it longer? So yeah, I mean, I think a lot of people don't necessarily think about how to stretch it, but there are obviously creative ways to do so. In growing a company, I feel like there's a lot of like, not necessarily hacks. I don't like the word of hacks, but I think like what we get to is like, what people deem as hacks is like you discover a shortcut after you failed like 9 times out of 10, right? And so it's like it's not really a shortcut anymore because you had to do all these other experiments. But I think like, has there been any of those scenarios where you've found a way, or you found a way to maybe like hire more effectively or evaluate people more effectively, to really like, stretch out that dollar as long as possible when it comes to talent?
Yes to all the above. Everything you listed.
And any tips to people?
Yeah, 100%. And you have to. Like, listen, there's rare scenarios, I'm sure, where, you raise stupid amount of capital and you can just go and just spend it and hire the best of the best talent that is out there, that is available to you, and use a hiring agency to do it, right? Like, that's for sure. That's for sure something that can happen. But the reality is that 99.9% of the companies are not going to be in that situation, right? And you have to be very efficient with your money. And then one of the ways, for us, one of the main things that happened is during the pandemic, when everybody started working from home, we realized, and I think that's something that a lot of startups realize, is that you're in LA or in California in general, like whoever you're going to hire, you're going to have to pay a lot of money if you want the best talent, right? But at one point you realize that not only you can hire anywhere in the US, but you can hire anywhere in the world. And if you think about that, it comes with its own set of challenges. Like it's actually a skill to be able to organize a company worldwide and having people like hire in different places in the world. But if you successfully do that, you can have, we actually like to not underpay. Like, there's like, we hear oftentimes like even people hiring in like countries like Mexico, Philippines and stuff like that, they actually trying to give minimum wage of whatever is there, but you're going to get the worst of the talents. But you actually, if you're willing to pay above what the market wants and bring a little bit of that tech company dream in other countries, like, I see a limitations that people see hiring overseas as like not giving equity incentives, not giving benefits, giving the least they can do, like almost like to cheap out whatever is outside of US. I see that a lot, and that's a big mistake. We actually flip that. We go into countries and we pay whatever the average is, we pay above the average. We give benefits, we give shares, and we're able to gather some of the best talents around the world. And honestly, I don't know if we could do. We've achieved tech-wise and development, like as a company as a whole, like things that some of the players out there with hundreds of millions of dollars of capital were not able to achieve. And the only reason we achieved that is literally because of the teams that we were able to hire in these different places, and how grateful they were for the culture that we have built around the company and how well they were treated. And these people are working. Nobody's asked how many hours a day you work, but I guarantee you, I look at my Slack, there's people working on Jurny 24/7 from all around the world, people working their ass off every time, everywhere. It's because of the culture that we created, and nobody's ever asking them. Everything is result driven. And that's, how can you put a price tag on that? Like if you want to do the same thing in a normal operation and hiring, normally and if you're a big company and you're kind of like treating people just like numbers, it's going to take you a lot more capital than it's taking us to build what we built.
That makes total sense, right? So it's like you treat your employees better than the market in wherever the respective countries are, which is probably more cost effective than hiring locally here. One, but then the two, right? Like you're able to stretch that out, and I do see that. I mean, that's one of the things I think about all the time, which is like, you want to find those people who are not checking their watch or clocking in or clocking out at a certain time. You want to make sure that they're focused on like deliverables. But to find people who think that way, right? Like to me, I don't care if you're working at 2 in the morning and you go to the gym at 2 in the afternoon. You know what I mean? Like if you're getting the stuff that you need to get done and you are, mindful of the task at hand, I feel like that's the most important thing. Because at the end of the day, a lot of times, when you're problem solving, the most effective way isn't necessarily sit in front of a computer the entire time, right? It's like breaking the monotony and finding the nuances, but finding that individual who's gonna think like that around the clock, then come back and then get it all done in one sitting is like, that's challenging. But I get
that's the challenge.
That's the challenge.
But I want to say this: what are your chances of finding that individual in a single city versus all over the world?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
And that's what we're trying to find. We're trying to find small diamonds like all over the world, and your chances, your pool becomes massively bigger.
I've hired internationally, for a couple of my companies, and I agree. I think it's you can get a lot of talent, and you open up that talent pool largely when you're open to that. It does come with its own set of challenges, but I do think like, if you've gotten to the habit of doing it in the beginning and you build out that process where you figure out where the checks and balances need to be, I think it's worth that initial investment of time to solve for it for yourself, because I think it does, over the longer term, it's most optimal. I think for any, I think the future of work is just going to be, it's more optimal to do it that way. So
absolutely.
What has been some of those things that was hard to, I think, figure out, for you specifically or for Jurny specifically when you do hire internationally? Obviously, like I think it requires a certain level of trust, right? But it's also like, how do you evaluate to find somebody who you can have that confidence in, to place that trust, to be like, okay, this person's going to be the one that gets it done? Like, are there certain questions you ask, certain personality traits that you look for, certain experience work-wise? Do you put them through tests? Like, how do you ultimately like find that quality candidate?
A few different ways. One is existing relationships. Like if you can find someone who's like has a really strong resume and it comes like from existing relationships. Like I'll give you an example. Our CTO had his own software agency for like over 15 years in Italy and managed like 20 people under him for 15 years, worked for some of the largest brands. Like that's the talent that we found. He had an existing pool of developers, and when we started working with him as a contractor, right? As actually we were working with his agency from an existing relationship that I had prior. And once he learned more and more about the company, fell in love with the culture and what we were building, and that person then eventually evolved into becoming our CTO, right? But then, for example, hiring in Mexico, we found one of the best hiring agency in Mexico, where they do personality tests, they do English level tests. Like, so you have a whole set of tests that they set up for you. They also have recommendations that they call. Like, we pay more than what you will pay any other agency in Mexico, but it's still cheaper than what you will pay a hiring agency or hiring someone in US directly. And then, like within 1 year, you're going to be coming out way ahead by doing that. So there's different things that we learn. One of the things that I don't recommend, I mean, if you just started maybe, but like there's a lot of agencies where you can hire through them. They do a lot for VA, right? And things like that. But that we found to be like a very bad idea, bad system. Like we did not like that. Again, we figure out how much some of those people were paid in the field. I'll give you an example. In the Philippines, some of the agents we were hiring through, an agency, we were paying that agency like $2,000 a month. The agents were paid $500 a month. You want to make sure that if you're paying someone $2,000, all those $2,000 goes to that person. And that's where you're gonna like. So it comes a lot with learning, just doing it, building those relationships. Eventually, one of those agents in the Philippines became. We realized that it was like a super talent. She became basically the main managers of all our agents in the Philippines, and she's the one doing all the hiring for us. Now it's the trusted person. She owns shares in the company. She makes a almost comparable to US salary, so that we make sure that she's very, very happy with us. And I could not ask for a more dedicated person than that person, for example, in our company. And I have examples like that over and over. So it's just, when you're in a country, I think finding someone who's kind of the anchor in that country, I think that's that main thing, right? We did that with the agent in the Philippines, we did that in Mexico, and we did that with the CTO in Italy. Those are our three anchors that now we can, hire more people from those countries as well, because we have those initial anchors.
That's super interesting. I mean, it's a topic that I don't think is covered a lot of the times when you're talking about the startup journey or the startup stories. You hear a lot about, I think like the dynamics between founders, or you hear a lot about, like the product hurdles, finding the right engineer and stuff like that. But I don't think you think of hiring overall in this context, where it's like really, again, like limitless talent pool, but figuring out the process that's going to work for your culture, your company culture. And a lot of times when, I feel like, when you are looking to do more of like a global, open yourselves up to like a global talent pool, that all automatically becomes ingrained as part of that culture of diversity within the organization, right? And I think it brings a lot of different perspectives outside of just the professional element, right? Like I think it brings a lot of like just personal different perspectives into it, which, I think to me, it's always been more advantageous to have other people that think differently from each other, to be able to get a wider view around just how people think, people interact. And I think that's amazing that you guys have found that to be. I'm curious if your background coming from Italy to the States has anything to do with kind of like the ideology, right? It's like, I mean, it's probably hard to ignore. Tell me a little bit about, like, again, how was it like growing up? Like, what part of Italy did you grow up in?
Yeah, I grew up in North Italy. It's actually a small city called Mantova. For me, it was very interesting. And culturally, I think it's somewhat similar, but somewhat very different than US. In some things, like it's an industrialized country and all of that, but from some other aspects, it's much different mentality, especially I think also like a smaller city. It was funny growing up and like looking at the American dreams from Italy, and talking about it with people in Italy, and then everybody's like, yeah, but it just happened because whatever, right? And it always gives you a reason. It's like kind of like it's never gonna happen to you or us, right there in Italy. And inside of me, I always thought, it's like, that's wrong. That's not true. That cannot be true. So that was very interesting. And at one point, I was like, I actually started being an entrepreneur very, very young. Well, it was small things at first, and then I think the first serious business I was organizing this like it was kind of like end of the year, like almost like spring break here. We have like like in the summer when the schools close, we have usually all schools like celebrate that, and all the students around Italy. And I started organizing like one event that started becoming bigger and bigger. We end up like the last couple of years renting out an entire water park and throwing this big party that started from the morning all the way to night. And And this water park was like kind of like an outside of the city in a village. So we like the last one we organized where we had like over 3,000 people showing up. And again, this is like in a small city, so we got people from different cities actually to come, students from different city, and we blocked the entire traffic. The police had to come to regulate the traffic because there was like we blocked off like literally the entire village. It was like there was like lines of cars like that they went for miles, which was like really funny. And I think that was like my first like entrepreneurial experiences like that I had, and I was just so tired. I had people around me that were just like, and I'm not talking about families or friends, actually close friends, but of people outside of that circle where they were like, almost like hostile because I was doing this type of things and be like, yeah, you cannot do it this age. You're gonna figure out one day. I'm like, I mean, what do you mean one day? And there's like people in the Silicon Valley becoming billionaires at 19 years old. I'm 17. I'm not that far away from it. Like, and I think that type of mentality was something that I got really tired of. And moving to US, I moved to US specifically to have to follow the American dreams and have a different mindset around me, which I really found actually. But I think going back to what you said, the way it connected is like me, there must be so many other young guys or kids that are dreaming of a much bigger opportunity, but they may not be as lucky as me that they could have had the opportunity to move to a different country where they could find those opportunities. And so it kind of became like a personal mission to go find those people in different countries and just give them also a piece of the American dream.
I love that. I mean, I connect to that part of it too, because I know when I hire from myself, like I'm finding a little bit of a nugget of something that I see of myself from, when I was their age or when I was younger or something like that, where, I think it's just like trying to find somebody who has that hunger, has that desire, that work ethic, but maybe just lacks a little bit of direction or lacks a little bit of like, the understanding of how to execute against, what they have, in terms of like their heart, like what they're really passionate about. And because I've been in those shoes where it's kind of like I didn't know I'm not a technical person, so it's like how do you get something off the ground when you're not technical is very challenging, especially in tech. And but there's ways around it, right? Like throwing up a landing page. I figured out how to do that kind of shit, which was just like throw up a landing page, see if you could drive traffic to it, and then you're gonna get some social proof there, and it's gonna tell you whether or not you should continue to invest into that idea in a very quick format, right? And I think a lot of people don't even think about just doing that, like put your idea onto a page, drive traffic to it, see what people do, and then you can figure out, okay, well, like if you get 100 people to like click on or take on an action, you probably have something there. If you get 0, then you probably don't. So it's a good way to kind of like test the waters before you like go all the way in. But I think that's awesome. I mean, I think like where you came from, where you grew up, and like having that mentality of different people. I'm curious of like, you seem like, a couple of things rang out when you were talking about that story. Like one is like, I'm curious as to like how or what propelled you into this entrepreneurial mindset. Like, was it just innate in you, or like, did your family come from something like ingrained that, seed into your mind? That's number one. And then the second thing that I was thinking about, is just like how similar your story is to, I feel like, not just other entrepreneurs, but I feel like, and this is like, a very common tale for people who are in entertainment or like people who are creatives, right? Where they're like coming from a small town and they're different, whether they're pursuing music or the arts or, or entrepreneurship. I feel like the idea to like think differently from your community or think outside the box is one of those commonalities I think that a lot of people go through in order to find their path to whatever their determination of success is. And it's like almost breaking from that mold of what everybody else exists in and then, finding your own path, forging your own path. And then you do find, ultimately, you get, when you start forging your own path, you realize, hey, there's other people who think like me. There's other people from all these small towns and all these different places that actually, left that same kind of mindset into this world. And it's just so strange to me because then it's almost to me like the Matrix, where you have the people who are behind the scenes that, are steering the ship, or the people who are performing and saying the words or giving these performances or building the products, and then you have the people who are consuming it. And whether they are aware of it or not, they're consuming. They're not building or creating. They're consuming it, and it's still a part of their ideology. It becomes a part of, and it's just funny that that's the cycle of things. But the mass public typically isn't is still very scared of things that are different or ideas that are different, which is weird. But yeah, but back to that first point, which is I'm curious as to where did that entrepreneurial seed come from?
Yeah, well, I want to touch upon something that you said before I go to that.
Yeah.
When I said that one of the best advice was to be true to yourself, and I think that's what most people are afraid of, right? Going back to literally what I was saying in the beginning. People are afraid of being themselves. And honestly, that's, for me, it's always been trying to pursue happiness. And from the very beginning, really, if you're honest with yourself and try to pursue happiness, it's eventually going to bring you to whatever you were meant to be, right? If you're meant to be an entrepreneur, a musician, whatever it is. I know that nowadays being an entrepreneur is almost a cool thing. I never even for 1% did it for that. Actually, if anything, where I was coming from, being an entrepreneur, it was not seen as a cool thing at all. People would be like, what are you doing? Just stay in your lane. What are you doing? And so I think being honest to yourself, I've at the same time, I think the circumstances where you are, they can help you. So I had circumstances that were not helping me. I think the environments that I was in and the school and all that. But then I had circumstances that helped me, my family, especially my dad. I actually had entrepreneurs in both sides of my family. My grandpa, which I never met from my dad's side, but he was a brilliant entrepreneur, actually, that built business during the Second World War, where everybody was scared, and he was actually out in the field and just, building a business, while things were everybody were terrified and didn't know what was going to happen. So through him, my dad has been an entrepreneur. He's an entrepreneur still. And also from my mom's side, her mom was an entrepreneur, actually. And I think one of the things is that they always taught me to look at solutions and to always incentivize me to try things. Yes, society didn't like me failing, but my parents didn't care. They wanted me to fail. They wanted me to go out and try. So I'm I can consider myself very lucky to have the parents that I have, because that was definitely helpful. And not everybody has that luck, but I'm sure that you can find that elsewhere, right? So that's a piece that helped me. But I wasn't an entrepreneur because my dad was, or because my grandparent was. Because, being honest to myself, that's what I'm passionate about. I'm passionate about fixing problems, and it's weird because I look at life and I see things that it could be done better all the time. Actually, one of my biggest challenges is how do you just focus on one problem? I want to fix them all. It's almost like a disease. I'm doing 10 things. Okay, at one point in my life, I said, okay, you gotta focus on one thing and have maybe one hobby, and that's it, because otherwise you're all over the place and you're not gonna accomplish anything.
That's pretty common though. I mean, 10 to 12 of these now in, I would say I've had at least 3 to 4 say the exact same thing and give me examples of what they're trying to solve. I had one, Dan from a company called Push Press was like, he walks into a coffee shop and he identifies why the customer flow is wrong and how the things are set up in that space is wrong. And he's like talking to his wife, who's just kind of like rolling her eyes the whole situation because he's trying to solve, the whole workflow environment of those situations. But I think that's very true though. I mean, I think the root inherent, in a lot of entrepreneurs and founders is just that idea of problem solving, and then finding a problem that you're so passionate about that you just can't stop from doing it. You just feel compelled to. And I think those are the ones that are the most successful, where you have that organic derivation from a life experience or from your own professional experiences where you've identified those gaps and you want to go fix it. I think it's harder, to be like, you have the Zuckerbergs and you have those people like straight out of college and starting these things, which is great, but I think it's few and far between to know that, to know what your calling is. And I think you need a little bit of life experience most of the times to find that, as opposed to like, having the skill set to build something. And then, you hear a lot of like software developers where, they have the skill set to build whatever, but they're trying to find the problem and that they're trying to fix, but they don't have necessarily any like direct relationship to the problem. And I think that sometimes is a disconnect. It's like you don't see a lot of those types of stories being like largely successful. I mean, they could be very, very smart people, but at the end of the day, it's like, there's a lot to it to really have that domain expertise. So
I could not agree more. And I think this is Mark Cuban saying this, and I think this cannot be more true than this. The 10 years overnight success, honestly, it's so true. Like of course there's going to be that one like single person that is going to be, like stumbling on the right idea, the right place, the right time, and it's very smart and has the right set of skills. Everything falls into place perfectly. Just like you could go tomorrow and play the lottery and win the lottery, right? Like, I mean, not to take credit away from those people, I'm sure, but I'm saying like, there's that, but that's the minority. Like the majority of, I say normal people, they have to have that 10 years overnight success. That's why if you're not extremely passionate about it, like you said, you need to be willing to endure it for 10 years and go through the pain of 10 years, right? Like, and maybe 2 or 3 different startups. Like, luckily, none of my startups really necessarily fail on paper because I kind of like pivot one into the other. But that's 10 years of like me not going and, have the security of having like a great job with great salary and all of that, and I definitely have the skills to get a well-paid job and not having to go through that struggle. So you have to do it for a different reason than just money or success. Otherwise it's not going to happen.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, and we can end it at that note too, because I know we're wrapping up on time here, but I think like that speaks volumes. I think people who are sitting on their couches at home, wanting to be an entrepreneur, wanting to be a founder, like it's not easy. And it's not to say that's to deter you, but you need to find something that you are willing to invest 10 plus years of your time, because you will run into those walls in year 1, in year 2, in year 3, in year 4, where you are not going to want to do it, that you're going to wish that you turned around and that you wish you took that high paying salary job and you have your 2 weeks of paid vacation, right? But I think like there's a lot to be said, and there's so many quotes around this too, which is just like the idea of perseverance and the idea of just like waiting it out. It's almost like, you might go down these paths where it's like, you might spend a year in darkness, but there's light at the other side of that. And I think just, reminding yourself and sometimes it's masochistic, to a certain degree, where it's like, you gotta have this super, super thick skin to be like, be able to tolerate it all. But, I think like that's what separates it. And it's like anything else in life, right? It's like there is in anything that's worthwhile, it takes the time. And I like that idea of like, of what you brought up here, like 10 years overnight success. I mean, that's a great takeaway.
Definitely. it's a form of mastery, I guess. Like in any skills, entrepreneurship is a skill.
We learned a lot about, I think, how to build the right culture, how to hire. I think in probably like the most efficient way and effective way possible within that culture that you've set up. But also, I think like learned a lot about just your, I think your background, and then the idea of perseverance and the idea of, again, like building. It's almost like building blocks, from your very first venture to where Jurny is today. Like you built on these experiences. So congratulations to you, and congratulations and the best on Jurny's success in the future. Especially I think as the pandemic starts to slow itself down, seeing a lot more people, traveling, I definitely see a lot of value in what you guys have built. And I'm excited to see where you guys are in the next 6 months to a year from now.
Yeah, thank you. And it was awesome host and great questions. I appreciate it.